This raises a second point that I want you to see here. And that is, there was one of our sisters here in the fellowship stopped me and said, you know, my brother was in the study last Wednesday. And she said, the problem is he said, well, if this is all true about this tribulation thing, if it's all true, then I will become a believer. I will get right with the Lord at that time. And she said, well, it's going to cost you because there's going to be intense persecution. And he said, I would be honored to go down in the name of the Lord for this Lord, if it indeed is true. That doesn't bother me. And so this sister said, John, what do I say to my brother? I mean, he says, hey, if the tribulation happens and I can see that it's all real, I would be honored to be a martyr. I would be honored. The answer to that is twofold. Number one, I tell people if you cannot live for Christ in these days, how can you be sure that you're going to be able to stand for Christ in the time of persecution and tribulation? You're playing a very dangerous game. But even if you can, even if you do, say, hey, I'm going to take my stand then. I'll lose my head perhaps. I'll be killed in the tribulation maybe. No problem. I'll be a martyr for him. You have to understand this. Folks, look at this passage carefully. These people are not the church. They're in a different position. Those that get saved in the tribulation period, yes, they'll be in heaven. Yes, the angels are rejoicing. Yes, they're in white robes with palm fronds in their hand. But they are not the bride of Christ. What do you mean? It says that these people, verse 9, stand before the throne. They stand before the throne. What about us? We sit in the throne as the bride of Christ. That is clearly stated in chapter 3, verse 21, to him that overcometh, will I grant, Jesus says, to sit with me in my throne. Talking to the church, Revelation chapter 3. We don't stand before the throne. We sit in the throne along with our Lord. These people here, you see, they stand before, doing what? They serve him day and night, verse 15. Mark that. This elder says, these are they which stand before the throne of God and serve him day and night. We don't serve the Lord day and night. We rule and reign with the Lord. They serve him. They are slaves. Now, a great place to be a slave, heaven. Wonderful place to be a servant, you betcha. Because the Lord is going to feed them and wipe tears from their eyes and bless them by taking them to the living water. Glory. But they're servants. They're slaves. They're in a different category altogether. These people, you see, they came out, verse 14 says, these are they which came out of the tribulation. We, the church, are kept from the tribulation. That's what Jesus tells us in chapter 3, verse 10. He says, because you have kept the word of my patience to the church, I will keep you from the hour of tribulation, which shall come upon all the world. So, what am I saying? These serve the Lord. But you, who chose to believe in the Lord now, before you see angels flying, and Elijah and Moses preaching, and miracles happening, before you see things, you've chosen to believe with the eye of faith. And Jesus said to Thomas, didn't he, Thomas? You have seen and believed, but blessed are those who have what? Not seen and believed. It's the bride of Christ. And Jesus went on to say something amazing. I'll read it to you. From Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, he says this. He says, blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily, I say to you, that he, Jesus, shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. As amazing as this is, when we get to heaven, I can't understand this. I'm amazed at this. But I believe in this because Jesus said it's true. When we get to heaven, he comes and serves us. He serves me and he serves you. Why? Because he's the bridegroom and we're the bride. And he shares this incredible love with us. So what you have to do is you have to tell people, you have to say to folks, listen, understand this. If you wait till the tribulation and get saved, great, you'll go to heaven. But you're not going to be the bride of Christ. See, this is what a lot of people are ignorant about when it comes to prophecy. There are different categories of people in heaven. You have the bride of Christ. You have the tribulation servants. Those that are coming to the Lord, described here in chapter 7. And they too will go to heaven. But they're not the bride of Christ. You have the Old Testament believers. They're in a different category too. Do you know that? What do you mean? Remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, verse 11? He said this when he was talking about John the Baptist. He declared this directly. He said, truly I say to you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Moses, Elijah, David, Samuel, none are greater than John the Baptist. Of all that have been born among women, none are greater than John the Baptist. And then he says this, notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John. Whoa. What does that mean? John was an Old Testament believer. Well, wait a minute, Pastor John. He's talked about in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. What do you mean? He's in the New Testament. No, he dies before Jesus Christ is crucified, doesn't he? He's an Old Testament prophet. His story is told in the beginning of the Gospels, but John the Baptist is the greatest of the Old Testament figures, but Jesus says the least of the Christians are greater than John the Baptist because we're in a different category. We're the bride of Christ. There are different categories. We'll talk about this more further and lay it out for you when we get towards the end of Revelation. But suffice for tonight to simply say, be aware that you have different categories going into eternity. The bride of Christ, who sits in the throne with the Lord, rules and reigns on behalf of Christ. He serves us. He's in love with us. Then you have the servants, those that get saved in the tribulation period. Then you have the Old Testament believers, the wife of Jehovah, as we shall see. Different than the bride of Christ, a different category. I've camped on this point because you need to tell people who will say to you, well, I'll just see how it plays out. You say, well, okay. It'll probably kill you, first of all. And then if you do believe and it kills you, you get to go to heaven as a slave. Great place to be a slave. It's going to be a fantastic place to be in any category. But you're not going to be what you could have been if you would believe today. Today, if you hear His voice, harden not your heart. Today is the day of salvation. Don't wait until you see it happen with your eyes physically. Be a man of faith. Be a woman of faith. And be a part of the bride of Christ, you see. Are you with me?